Hello world and welcome to Hacks. In this video we are going to continue walking down the path of a red team operator, and we're going to be looking at red team engagements. Learn the steps and procedures of a red team engagement, including planning, frameworks and documentation. Task 1. Introduction. The key to a successful engagement is well-coordinated planning and communication through all parties involved. This room will focus on various components of a red team engagement and planning and documenting a campaign for a red team engagement. Red team engagements come in many varieties, including tabletop exercises, adversary emulation, and physical assessments. Learning objectives. Understand components and functions of a red team engagement. Learn how to properly plan an engagement based off of needs and resources available and TTPs. Understand how to write engagement documentation in accordance to the client objective. This room requires no prerequisite information or knowledge. Read the above to continue to the next task. Task 2. Defining scope and objective. Engagements can be very complex and bureaucratic. The key to a successful engagement is clearly defined client objective and goals. Client objectives should be discussed with the client and red team to create a mutual understanding between both parties of what is expected and provided. Set objectives are the basis for the rest of the engagement documentation and planning. Without a clear and concise objective and expectations, you are preparing for a very unstructured and unplanned campaign. Objectives set the tone for the rest of the engagement. When assessing a client's objectives and planning the engagement details, you will often need to decide how focused the assessment is. Engagements can be categorized between a general internal network penetration test or a focused adversary emulation. A focused adversary emulation will define specific APTs or group to emulate within the engagement. This will typically be determined based on groups that target the company's particular industries, i.e. finance institutions and APT 38. An internal network penetration test will follow a similar structure but will often be less focused and use more standard TTPs. So as we learned in Room 1, APT, Advanced Persistent Threats, and TTPs, Tactic, Techniques and Procedures. The specific objectives will depend on a case-by-case basis of the engagement defined by the client objectives. Client objectives will also affect the engagement's general rules of the engagement and scope. The topics will be expanded upon in Task 6. The client objectives only set basic definition of the client's goals of the engagement. The specific engagement plans will expand upon the client objectives and determine the specifics of the engagement. Engagement plans will be covered later within this room. The next keystone to a precise and transparent engagement is a well-defined scope. The scope of engagement will vary by organization and what their infrastructure and posture look like. A client scope will typically define what you cannot do or target. It can also include what you can do or target. While the client objectives can be discussed and determined along with providing the team, a scope should only be set by the client. In some cases, the red team may discuss grievances of the scope if it affects an engagement. They should have a clear understanding of the network and the implications of the assessment. The specifics of the scope and the wording will always look different. Below is an example of what verbiage may look like within the client scope. No exfiltration of data, that's, stealing the data. Production servers are off limits. Specific IP addresses out of scope. System downtime is not permitted under any circumstances. Exfiltration of PII is prohibited. When analyzing a client's objectives or scopes, the red team's perspective, it is essential to understand the more profound meaning and implications. When analyzing, you should always have a dynamic understanding of how your team would approach the problem's objectives. If needed, you should write your engagement plans or start them from only a bare reading of the client's objectives and scope. Read the example client objectives and answer the questions below. No answer needed. Below is an example of the client objectives of a mature organization with a strong security posture. Example 1. Global Enterprise. Objectives. Identify system misconfigurations and network weaknesses. Focus on exterior systems. 2. Determine the effectiveness of endpoint detection and response systems. 3. Evaluate overall security posture and response. 3.1 SIEM and detection measures. 3.2 remediation. 3.3 segmentation of DMZ and internal servers. 4. Use of white cards is permitted depending on downtime and length. 5. Evaluate impact of data exposure and exfiltration. Scope. System down is not permitted under any circumstances. Any form of distributed denial of service attack or denial of service attack is prohibited. Use of any harmful malware is prohibited. This includes ransomware and other variations. Exfiltration of PIIs is prohibited. Use arbitrary exfiltration data. Attacks against system within 10.0.4.0/22 are permitted. Attacks against systems within 10.0.12.0/22 are permitted, so those like your network ranges. Being enterprises will closely monitor interactions with the DMZ and critical production systems. Any interaction with .betexchange.xyz is prohibited. All interactions with .globalenterprises.thm is permitted. Question 1. What is the seeder range permitted to be attacked? So, we are allowed to attack the 10.0.4/22. Question 2. Is the use of white cards permitted? Yes or no? And I believe it said the use of white cards was permitted. Use of white cards is permitted depending on downtime and length, so we're just going to say yes on that. Are you permitted to access hash.betexchange.xyz? And we can see there is prohibited, so the answer is no. Task 3. Rules of engagement. Rules of engagement, ROE, are a legally binding outline of the client objectives and scope with further details of engagement expectations between both parties. This is the first official document in the engagement planning process and requires proper authorization between the client and the red team. This document often acts as a general contract between two parties. An external contractor or other NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, can be used. The format and wording of the rules of engagement are critical since it is a legally binding contract and sets clear expectations. Each rule of engagement structure will be determined by the client and red team and can vary in content length and overall sections. Below is a brief table of standard sections you may see contained in rules of engagement. Section name, section details, executive summary, overarching summary of all the contents and authorization with the rules of engagement document. Purpose defines why the rules of engagement document is used. References, any references used throughout the ROE document, HIPAA, blah blah blah. Scope, statement of the agreement to restrictions and guidelines. Definitions of technical terms used throughout the ROE document. Rules of engagement and support agreement. Definitions, obligations of both parties and general technical expectations of engagement conduct. Provisions. Define expectations and additional information from the rules of engagement. Requirement, restrictions and authority. Define specific expectations of the red team cell. Ground rules. Define the limitations of a red team cell's interactions. Resolutions of issues, point of contact. Contains all essential personnel involved in an engagement. Authorization. A statement of authorization for the engagement. Approval. Signatures from both parties approving all subsections of the preceding document. Appendix. Any further information from preceding subsections. When analysing a document, it is important to remember that only a summary and its purpose is to be a legal document. Further and in more depth planning are required to expand upon the rules of engagement and client objectives. For this task, we have shortened the document adapted from Red Team Guide. And the questions. Download the sample rules of engagement task files. Once downloaded, read the sample document and answer the questions below. Complete that and head up to the downloaded task files. Okay, so it looks like we have a document here. Rules of engagement, global enterprises, the 1st, 17th, 2022. Executive summary. The rules of engagement ROE document the approvals, authorizations and critical implementation issues necessary to execute the engagement. The signing of the ROE constitutes acknowledgement and approval of the customer, system owner and red team of the red team's authorities in execution of the engagement. The objectives include monitor security posture and response, focus on internal systems and insider threats, assess the response of the defense team, assess the ability to move laterally through internal infrastructure. Employ physical penetration testing to assess on-site security posture. Explicit restrictions. Use of white cards is strictly prohibited. Any form of distributed denial of service attack or denial of service attack is prohibited. Attacks against any system with the 192.168.1.0/24 is prohibited. Authorized space 10.0.4/22 betexchange.xyz global enterprises.th10. Activities, reconnaissance, access types, phishing, physical and social engineering, positioning, assumed breach scenarios, impact. Confidential information, not for distribution, page left intentionally blank. So we've got a very basic rules of engagement document there, and I think we've got some questions that we need to answer. How many explicit restrictions are specified? Let's have a look. 1, 2, 3. What is the first access type mentioned in the document? Phishing. Is the red team permitted to access 192.168.1.0/20 floor? And that is prohibited. So that is going to be a no. Task 4, campaign planning. Prior to this task, we are primarily focused on engagement planning and documentation from the business perspective. Campaign planning uses the information acquired and planned from the client objectives and rules of engagement and applies it to various plans and documents to identify how and what the red team will do. Each internal red team will have its methodology and documentation for campaign planning. We will be showing one in-depth set of plans that allow for precise communication and detailed documentation. The campaign summary we'll be using consists of 4 different plans, varying in depth and coverage adapted from military operation documents. Each plan can be found in the table below with a brief explanation. And you can see there we got the table below. It's the type of plan, the explanation of the plan, and the plan contents. Engagement plan. An overarching description of technical requirements of the red team. ConOps, resource, personal requirements, timelines, operations plan. An expansion of the engagement plan goes further into specifics of each detail. Operators, known, information, responsibilities, etc. Mission plan. The exact commands to run and execution time of the engagement. Commands to run, time objectives, responsible operator, etc. Remediation plan defines how the engagement will proceed after the campaign has finished. Report, remediation, consultation, etc. etc. Another example campaign plan is the red team.guide. Might be worth having a look at that. Engagement checklist. The checklist can be found here and acts as a more generalized approach to planning campaign and information needed. In the upcoming task, we will go further in depth with these plans, documentation, and specifics of each as we take a deep dive into campaign planning. Let's have a quick look at those. This is a cool site. I've not been on here before, but might actually have to get that book, get a Kindle copy, and review. Let's have a look at the checklist. Cool. Print this off, put it on a clipboard, walk into the building, own it. So we'd have no questions to answer, we just have to acknowledge that we have read it. Task 5, Engagement Documentation. Engagement documentation is an extension of campaign planning where ideas and thoughts of the campaign planning are officially documented. In this context, the term document can be deceiving as some plans do not require proper documentation and can be as simple as an email. This will be covered later in this task. In this task, we will cover a technical overview of the contents of each campaign plan prior to looking at the plans and documents themselves in the upcoming tasks. Engagement plan, component and purpose, ConOps, concept of operations, non-technically written overview of how red team meets the client objectives and target client. Resource plan, includes timelines and information required for the red team to be successful, any resourceful requirements, personnel, hardware, cloud requirements. Operations plan, component, purpose, personnel, information on employees and requirements, stopping conditions, how and why should the red team stop during an engagement, ROE, optional. Rules of engagement, okay. Technical requirements, what knowledge will the red team need to be successful? Mission plan, comment, purpose, command playbooks, exact commands and tools to run, including when, why, and how, commonly seen in larger terms with many operators at varying skill levels. Execution time, times to begin stages of engagement, can optionally include exact times to execute tools and commands. Responsibilities and roles, who does what and when. Remediation plan, optional. Component, purpose, report, summary of the engagement details and report of findings. Remediation consultation. How will the client remediate findings? It can be included in the report or discussed in a meeting between the client red team. Read the above and move on to the upcoming specific task. Task 6, Concept of Operations. The concept of operations, ConOps, is part of the engagement plan that details a high-level overview of proceedings of an engagement. We can compare this to an executive summary of a penetration test report. This document will serve as a business client reference and a reference for a red cell to build off of and extend for further campaigns. So, an executive summary, for lack of a better term, is a dumbed down overview of what happened. It usually doesn't contain much technical language, and it mainly, because it's the actual report is aimed at executive level people, hence why it's called an executive summary, and it outlines the impacts of the risks, like what it's going to cost, what the potential risk to the organization is. So if this is similar to an executive summary penetration test report, then I would assume that it would use not so much technical language. The ConOps document should be written from a semi-technical perspective, okay, assuming that the target audience reader has zero to minimal technical knowledge. Although ConOps should be written at a high level, you should not omit details such as common tooling, target groups, etc. As with most red team documents, there is no set standard of ConOps document. Below is an outline of critical components that should be included in a ConOps. Client name, service provider, time frame, general objectives and phases. Other training objectives, exfiltration, high-level tools, techniques planned to be used, threat group to emulate, if any. The key to writing and understanding a ConOps is to provide just enough information to get a general understanding of all ongoings. The ConOps should be easy to read and show clear definitions and points that readers can easily digest. Answer the questions below. Read the ConOps. Read the example ConOps and answer the questions below. Do we have an example? Oh, this is it here. Cool. Example 1. Halo Enterprises. ConOps. Halo Enterprises has hired TryHackMe as an external contractor to conduct a month-long network infrastructure assessment and security posture. The campaign will utilize an assumed breach model starting in Tier 3 infrastructure. Operators will progressively conduct reconnaissance and attempt to meet objectives to be determined. If defined goals are not met, the red team cell will move and escalate privileges within the network laterally. Operators are also expected to execute and maintain persistence to sustain for a period of 3 weeks. A trusted agent is expected to intervene if the red cell is identified or burned by the blue cell throughout the entirety of the engagement. The last engagement day is reserved for cleanup and remediation and consultation with the blue cell and white cell. The customer has requested the following training objectives: assess the blue team's ability to identify and defend against live intrusions and attacks, identify the risk of an adversary within the internal network. The red cell will accomplish objectives by employing the use of Cobalt Strike as the primary red cell tool. The red cell tool is permitted to use other standard tooling only identifiable to the target threat. Okay, based on the company's security posture and maturity, the TTPs of the threat group FIN 6 will be employed throughout the engagement. And then we have no need to answer this question here, but we have a how long is the engagement going to last? I believe it said that it was going to be 3 weeks, so okay. Sustain for 3 weeks. The actual period is 1 month. How long is the red cell expected to maintain persistence? Okay, and this is the 3 week. Fantastic. What is the primary used tool for within the engagement? That's going to be Cobalt Strike. If I spell that correctly. No, it's with an A. A. That's it. Okay, that was interesting. I've never read a ConOps before. Again, I got a bit tricked out by the time frames. So there was the persistence for 3 weeks, but the assessment was for a month. But yeah, it was a informative exercise. Task 7, resource plan. The resource plan is the second document of the engagement plan, detailing a brief overview of dates, knowledge required, optional resource requirements. The plan extends to ConOps and includes specific details such as dates, knowledge required, etc. Unlike ConOps, the resource plan should not be written as a summary, instead written as a bulleted list of subsections. As with most red team documents, there is no standard set of resource plan templates or documents. Below is an outline of an example subsection of the resource plan. Header, personal writing, dates, customer, engagement dates, reconnaissance dates, initial compromise dates, post-exploitation and persistence dates, miscellaneous dates, knowledge required, optional, reconnaissance, initial compromise, post-exploitation, personnel, requirements, hardware, blah blah blah. The key to writing and understanding a resource plan is to provide enough information to gather what is required but not become overbearing. The document should be straight to the point and define what is needed. Answer the questions below. Navigate to the view site button and read the provided resource plan. Once complete, answer the questions below. So we have a interactive site here. We're going to open that up. I'm going to close that. And we're going to have a look at the resource plan. Red cell, lead, Cyrillic, engagement dates, assistant lead, Simpuki. I hope these are members of TryHackMe, like the team members. Execution dates, reconnaissance, initial access, post-exploitation, remediation, miscellaneous, resource summary. The red team has requested the needed resources outlined in the following document. Any further resources needed by any teams or operations should create a revised resource plan and submit those to the client representations for approval. Personal requirements. 1 red cell lead, 1 red cell assistant, 3 red cell operators. 1. No hardware is required for this engagement. All machine resources will be allocated in the cloud. Cloud requirements. Red cell will send an expense report of cloud costs to the client after the engagement. Red cell is requesting the budget of $1,000 for AWS cloud costs. That's Amazon Web Services. No other requirements are currently projected. Okay, so that seems fairly simple. Let's have a look. When will the engagement end? Reconnaissance engagement dates to the 11th of the 12th, 21. Yeah, let's try this date. Okay, that seems a bit weird. What is the budget for the Amazon web costs? We're just going to do $1,000. It looks like they actually want the dollar symbol in there. Are there any miscellaneous requirements? No. And that is task 7. Task 8, Operations Plan. The Operations Plan is a flexible document or documents that provide specific details of engagement and actions occurring. The plan expands upon the current ConOps and should include a majority of specific engagement information. The rules of engagement can also be placed here depending on the depth and the structure of the rules of engagement. The operations plan should follow a similar writing scheme to the resource plan using bulleted lists and small subsections. As with the other Red Team documents, there is no standard set of the operation plan templates or documents. Below is an outline of example subsections within the operations plan. Header, personal writing, dates, customer, halting, stopping conditions can be placed in the rules of engagement depending on depth. Required assigned personnel, specific techniques, tactics and procedures, and attacks planned, communications plan, rules of engagement optional. The most notable addition to this document is the communications plan. The communications plan to summarize how the red cell will communicate with other cells and the client overall. Each team will have its preferred method to communicate with clients. Below is a list of possible options a team will choose to communicate. Vector, email, Slack. What is Vector.io? I've never heard of that before. Okay. It's like Monday.com or something. Navigate to the View Site button and read the provided operations plan. Once complete, answer the questions below. So we have another interactive website here, and we have the operations plan. We've got the same red cell lead and the same assistant seed. We have the engagement dates. We have the engagement objective. Identify system misconfigurations and network weaknesses. Determine the effectiveness of endpoint detection and response systems. Evaluate overall security posture and response. Evaluate impact of data and exposure and exfiltration. Halting and stopping conditions. In the event of a system outage, all engagement operations will cease. In the event of an operator being burnt, information will be kept on a need-to-know basis. In the event of any evidence of an actual attack is found, all operations will cease and an investigation will begin. So when they're saying getting burnt, I assume that refers to like when they are attempting to gain physical access to a site and somebody calls them out and is like, "You've been burnt, bro," and then they get arrested and then they have to get out of jail free card and escorted off site and things like that. Communication plans. Throughout the engagement, the Red Team cell will utilize Vector.io to communicate internally and with the client. Being enterprises, the client will be given a daily update on the engagement and debriefed on progress and occurrences. If any stopping conditions are encountered, the red cell will consult with the client immediately upon discovery. Contact information for all teams and cells and members of the engagement can be found within the rules of engagement document. I imagine that's quite frightening for a Red Team operator, just walking in and getting burnt straight away. Plans, TTPs and attacks. Due to the discovery of email addresses in the reconnaissance phase, spear phishing via MSHTA and typo squatted domains will be employed in the initial access phase. So typo squatted domains, I assume that's domains that sound like beanenterprises.com or something like that, but spelled a little bit differently or using characters. So instead of an I, you can replace it with an L or a 1. So it looks similar, so when it comes through their email, it looks genuine to unsuspecting victims. I assume that's what that means. I hope they elaborate on that further. To assess detection capabilities, the red cell will employ process masquerading and signed binary proxy execution. To sustain the engagement, the red cell will employ the use of C2 infrastructure through HTTP and HTTPS protocols, data encoding, and ingress tools. To keep C2 domains and infrastructure alive, domain generation algorithms will be employed during initial access and persistence. Cool. So, what phishing method will be employed during the initial phase? I believe they mentioned spear phishing somewhere. Phishing. Cool. What site will be utilized for communications between the client and red cell? I believe they mentioned that there. Vector.io. I wonder if Vector.io are giving THM kickbacks for advertising them. They should be. If a system outage, the red cell will continue the engagement. That is false. As soon as the outage is reported, they will cease operations. Fantastic, and that is task 8. Task 9, Mission Plan. The mission plan is a specific document that details the exact actions to be completed by operators. The document uses information from previous plans and assigns actions to them. How the document is written and detailed will depend on the team. As this is an internally used document, the structure and detail have less impact. As with all documents outlined in this room, presentation can vary. This plan can be as simple as emailing all operators. Below is a list of the minimum detail that cell should include within the plan. Objectives, operators, exploits, attacks, targets, users, machines and objectives, execution plan variations. The two plans can be thought of I can't speak. The operator's plan should be considered from business and client perspective, and mission plan should be thought of from operator and red cell perspective. Questions: navigate to the view side button and read the provided mission plan. Once complete, answer the questions below. By the way, answering all these questions adds to your overall score on TryHackMe and it boosts it up. So if you like gamification of learning, then this is perfect. Mission plan: same red cell lead, same red cell assistant lead, engagement dates, client being enterprises. Engagement objectives: identify system misconfigurations and network weaknesses. This is very similar to the last document. Determine the effectiveness of endpoint detection and response systems. Evaluate the overall security posture and response. Evaluate impact of data exposure and exfiltration. Engagement breakdown: use of the email address list found from OSINT to craft spearphishing target word list. Use the MS payload found on the internal repositories. Consult lead for help with using domain generation algorithms with spearphishing. Phishing campaign will last from 10/13/21. Report success rate to the team leads to submit to Vector.io. Consult with the team lead and use tooling found on internal repository to maintain access, set up needed tool infrastructure. Targets: external targets: bean mail, bean prod, bean bean.com, 10.10.6.29. I wonder if they like Mr. Bean. Internal targets: determine the internal targets with team leads after initial access. Is this the right document? Yeah. So, in the event of any varying events throughout the engagement, immediate contact team lead and discuss how to continue. When will the phishing campaign end? So, the phishing campaign will last from the 10th of the 13th, 2021 to the 10th of the 13th of the 23rd, 2021. Okay. Are you permitted to attack 78? Well, it isn't in the plan, so I'm going to say no. Unless it says it's excluded. I can't see it included anywhere, so I'm just going to submit no. When stopping condition is encountered, you should continue working and determine the solution yourself with the team lead. In the event of wavering events throughout the engagement, immediately contact the team lead and discuss how to continue. So I would say that was false. When a stopping condition is encountered, you should continue working and determine. So I don't like this bit here. You could continue working. So I'm going to say false. Yeah, so you would just stop working and then talk with your team lead. Task 10, conclusion. We've done it. We've got to the end of this room. We have covered how you can quantify campaign plans into documents and prepare for a successful red team in this room. The consistent theme throughout this room has been that each red team will have its internal documents and ways of doing things. This is a crucial concept to understand when moving into the real world. The room only acts as a guide to get used to the concepts and ideas and provides a framework to use, not as a definitive step-by-step manual. When planning an engagement, remember that your number one goal is to meet the client's objectives. Planning and documenting are often overlooked and are crucial to a successful engagement. So I imagine a lot of organizations will have their own sort of process internally. Whether they include these documents, I don't know. Again, I've not done any red teaming, but I'm hopefully going to be doing some, so I look forward to that. But yeah, I imagine it can be different within each organization. They will have their own documents, maybe their own names, or maybe not have anything and just send a scope. But we'll see. But yeah, you can see there we've earned some tickets. Let's see what we got. I got the red team title and a 3-month voucher. So I need 2 more of those to get the title that I really, really want. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know how you're getting along in the rooms and whether I managed to help at all or whether my narration has just made it harder to learn. I apologise for all the vocabulary errors, I suppose. But yeah, kind regards.